Hello, my name is Courtney Watson. This was a group project with Rebecca Seymour, Lori Wright, Amber Works, and myself. We put together a presentation on current legal and ethical issues in education. So I'm going to be presenting that today. So the first legal issue in education is religion in the public schools. And there are a few things that kind of go with religion in the public schools, and one of those is prayer. Students can issue prayer, but teachers nor schools can. As long as the student is the one who is carrying out that prayer and devotional, that is permitted. Teachers can use the Bible for teaching purposes as long as it is secular and there's no discrimination, there's no judgment of other religions, you're not forcing your religion on someone else. All of those things are permitted. So teachers also have religious rights, and those are protected, can be expressed freely as long as they do not interfere with the educational process within the classroom or the school. And again, holiday parties, celebrations, and programs are also permitted as long as they are not in a religious manner. You're not pushing or forcing your religion through those parties or celebrations on students or other coworkers. So another topic is freedom of expression for students. Students have a freedom of expression as long as their freedom of expression is not disruptive against schools' rules, destruction of property, and in regards to others. They need to make sure that the things that they are saying are true, that do not infringe on others' beliefs or rights, that are not directed specifically to other people. There should be dress codes approved by Board of Education for students with freedom of expression. You know, they can wear things that say things, or just school boards need to be very specific in those policies, and that students and parents and teachers are aware of those policies. Again, another policy that schools should have is against drugs and weapon policy, and make sure that students are aware of that. When you're talking about cell phone use, and again, policies should be in place for regarding that. When you're talking about students who get in trouble for not following these policies, even though the policies were given to students and parents, they were asked to sign off on these policies, you still have to get adequate notice to those students and parents regarding the student behavior if you're planning on suspending or expulsion is going to happen to that student. You have to make sure that you give notice to the parents and students of the behavior ahead of time, even though you've already given them the policies and rules in writing and they have signed off that they have read those policies and rules. So search and seizure is another topic. The biggest thing with search and seizure, you have to have reasonable suspicion, and that reasonable suspicion is very hard evidence or specific information from a student or another person who saw directly, that you're going to find evidence if you search the property or the student or some, within the area of the student. So what makes it reasonable is that you know that you're going to turn up evidence. So some things that can be searched, so you want to be careful when you do search, is book bags and automobiles. You again have to be, those are their property, so you have to make sure that you have evidence to conduct those searches. School lockers and desks, even though they're property, you still have to have the evidence that you're going to find something when you're searching those school lockers and desks. And then the research also says that strip searches should almost always be avoided, except for under extreme circumstances regarding, the health and safety of other students. Again, in case of all searches, reliable information must lead school officials to believe that school rules have been violated or that the health and safety of students is threatened. Very important that you have to have that reasonable suspicion that something is going to be found. All right, so in kind of relation to that, you have the due process. And the due process is just the fundamental fairness process and procedures. You have to make sure that you're giving teachers, students, whoever you're, I can't think of the words, whoever you are saying that has done something that they shouldn't have or has something that they shouldn't have, you have to give them a due process. You have to make sure that you allow individuals to seek, they have to be able to explain themselves. So there's two types of due process. There's procedural due process and substantive due process, and those are both on the screen, as you can see. The procedural, it just guarantees that a prescribed set of steps be followed that allows individuals an opportunity to seek redress for alleged violations before any action is taken against them. And that's kind of what I was saying. They have to have the opportunity to explain themselves, to explain their side before any type of actions can be taken against their behavior. The substantive due process ensures that a valid reason exists before an individual is deprived of life, liberty, or property, and that the means used to achieve this objective are reasonable. So that kind of goes with, you have that evidence and you have validity that there is a reasonable cause that this person should be reprimanded for what they did. You have two other ones, and it's called a vagueness test and the presumption test. So the vagueness test, they should not be penalized for the behavior that he or she could not reasonably understand to be prohibited. They have to, the vagueness test, students and parents and, even coworkers, they have to know what reasonable behavior looks like and is expected by them. So that's why it's important to have those rules and policies in place. And then you have your presumption test, which place restrictions on the power of the state to deprive an individual of liberty or property without sufficient factual evidence to justify its action. For example, reasonable cause for a search. The presumptions test requires that state to clearly demonstrate that his or her legal or logical defensible basis prior to depriving or restricting a student's rights. So they have to clearly demonstrate that it has a legal or logical defense based on what they did before restricting or depriving them of their rights. So here is steps to administrative guide to due process. These are just some guidances that administration could use. So the essential focus of due process is fundamental fairness, making sure that we're upholding our end of treating everyone equally. The due process provides a remedy for students against arbitrary or capricious acts by school officials. The level of the due process is a function of the seriousness of the threat to deprive students of their liberty or property interest. Procedural and substantive due process singularly is of no value to school officials unless the requirements of both aspects are met when they contemplate depriving students of liberty and property interest. So you have to give them that right to explain their actions, to explain the things that they want to say, but then you also have to give that substantive due process as well. And then fairness is not always absolute. What constitutes fairness is in one situation may be totally unfair in another. And the courts use those balancing tests to determine the appropriateness of the procedures that should apply in any given situation. So all situations are different, and the courts, decide what it determines fairness in one case versus another case. All right, so talking about student records and liability, there are several things that you have to keep in mind. So you have the FERPA Act, which is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, and this act is designed to protect students' confidentiality records. FERPA allows the students' parents who have legal custody of those students to have control over their records. They should only be viewed by teachers who have a direct educational tie to those students. Those written records should be maintained and determined who has viewed the file, so there should be records of that. Any corrections on student records should be dated and initiated by the person responsible with the approval of a school official. So anytime that you need to make a correction or an update or a comment on a file, you have to initial with and also your school official. So within the FERPA Act and student records, these two topics are very important. Number one is slander, which is an oral defamation. It occurs when a teacher shares information about a student with another person who does not have a direct tie to that student. So using slander could get you in trouble. And then libel, which is written. It prevents educational stakeholders from including written information in student records that is not accurate. So when writing things about students, you want to make sure that it is accurate information and that you're not even writing, you're not even sharing written explanations about students that should not be shared with other people as well. All right, talking about students with disabilities. After working with students for a reasonable period of time and providing those academic interventions, teachers might start to see that their interventions are not working for the student and they're not seeing growth. Therefore, a referral process will probably begin to identify a child with a disability. Students who are classified with a disability should have an individualized education plan, which is normally called an IEP. They should be reviewed and updated each year to reflect the student's needs and the proper accommodations needed. Within those IEPs, those students will also have their individualized goals that they are going to work on meeting within that school year. So we also have something called the least restrictive environment. That is a place where the students with disabilities are able to learn with similar access to their peers. So they are going to still be placed, the majority of students with disabilities are still going to be placed in that general education classroom so that they're in their least restrictive environment so that they can also make progress in the same environment with students who do not have the same disabilities that they do. There is also an act called FAPE, and it is the Free and Appropriate Public Education. This is the right that all students with disabilities are entitled to receive equal access to the education that even students without disabilities receive. They should not be punished for their behaviors or manifestation of their disabilities. If a behavior is not associated with their disability, the student may receive disciplinary action. So that just means that if a student has an IEP, a behavioral IEP, and they're acting out or their behavior is directly correlated with their IEP, they may not receive disciplinary actions. But if their behavior is not associated with an identified disability, then they can receive those disciplinary actions. And then last but not least, we have our Alabama Educator Code of Ethics, and all teachers should be familiar with the Code of Ethics. So there are 9 standards listed in the Code of Ethics. You have professional conduct, and that just means that you will engage professionally with students and teachers. Any unethical conduct impairs teachers from their role or negatively impacts other teachers and students. That is considered you're not compliant with professional conduct. Standard 2 is trustworthiness. That just means that you're demonstrating that honesty and integrity when fulfilling your professional duties at work or outside of work. Standard 3 is unlawful acts. So that means that you are saying that you're going to comply with federal laws and state laws. And notice that did not say school laws. So you're held to the responsibility of complying with those federal and state laws. Standard 4 is teacher-student relationship. So you have to make sure that you uphold a professional relationship with students in school and outside of school. Standard 5 is about the use of alcohol, drugs, and tobacco use or possession. You should not intake alcohol or tobacco while fulfilling the school duties, and you should never use illegal or unauthorized drugs. Standard 6 talks about public funds and properties, and it just talks about how you should honor those funds. And when you're entrusted those funds, you need to make sure that you handle them with honesty, accuracy, and responsibility, because those are school funds. Standard 7 is the remunerative contract, and it just talks about how you're going to maintain the honesty with students, coworkers, and parents when accepting or receiving gifts, favors, donations, or other payments. You're stating that you're not going to use those for personal gain. Standard A is maintaining or maintenance of confidentiality. It talks about you have to abide by those state and federal laws and school policies. We talked about how important those were, not only for students but also for teachers, and relating to confidentiality of student personal records and state test materials. And we talked a lot about those student personal records when we talked about FERPA. And then Standard 9 is abandonment of contract. You have to uphold and fulfill all obligation responsibilities that are in your contract for the duration of that contract. So then the other two things that are listed in the Alabama Educator Code of Ethics, is reporting. So teachers are to report unethical behavior within 60 days or as soon as they are aware of the act, and then administration has 10 days to report to the state of that unethical behavior. And as disciplinary actions are concerned, you are issued a reprimand or warning, or the suspicion, revocation, and denial of education certificate. So those are the things that could be part of your disciplinary action. Again, those could be suspension, revocation, or denial of educator certificate. And then the least amount of disciplinary action could just be a warning. These are our references that we use to create this presentation. We used our School and Law of Public Schools, which is written by Essex, and then we also used our Educator Code of Ethics for the state of Alabama. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you so much.